Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this WIOA Wednesday webinar, this Workforce Wednesday webinar, as we are now changing that to. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Today's session is titled Nonviolent Crisis Intervention and How It's Affected by This Pandemic. And so we will be hearing from our presenter, Mary, in just a minute here. But before we do, just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First off, it's important to note that all participants on this call are in listen-only mode and you cannot unmute yourselves or show your video. If you have questions or comments as the webinar proceeds, we ask that you post those in the Q&A. We ask that you post all questions in the Q&A and then post any comments or if you have any technical difficulties in the chat section. And then we will address all of the questions during the live Q&A during the end of the session with our presenter. Another housekeeping item I wanted to mention is that if you would like to download the slide deck from today, you can do so. It is in the chat and I will put it in there again momentarily. And if you experience any technical difficulties from today or audio issues, please feel free to call in as well. And I have put that phone number in the chat as well. And again, I will put it in there again momentarily. I also wanted to note that this session is being recorded and the session recording from today and the presentation slide deck will be up on our website. The slide deck is already up on the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support website, and you can access that in the link that will be put in the chat. But the recording will be on that same website, but the recording will not be up for another 48 hours. So please give us ample time to edit the video and allow for uploading to our website. I also wanted to note that we are offering closed captioning, which should be at the bottom of your screen for accessibility reasons. And if you are not able to see that live closed captioning transcript, please feel free to chat me and I will help you turn that on. And I believe that is all the housekeeping items that I have for today. I did want to start with our beginning WIOA Wednesday webinar polls that we do every Wednesday. If you join us on Wednesdays, you're probably familiar with these polls, but the first one is just where's your local area? So where are you joining us from this morning? I am joining you from Central Illinois in Decatur. I'm working from home today, so I reside in Decatur, but our office is located in Bloomington Normal area. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer this poll. And we'll go ahead and end that and just share the results so everyone can see. So most of you are joining us from Central Illinois this morning. So welcome to my fellow Central Illinoisans. And then the rest of you are sprinkled across the state. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to learn a little bit more with us. And our next poll that we would like to put up is just which partner do you best represent? Oops. And so Title I, Title II, 3, 4, other WIOA partners and stakeholders, or if you best represent a state or local workforce innovation board. So we'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to answer this question. Okay, we'll go ahead and end that poll and share the results. So most of you are joining us from Title I this morning, so welcome. And some of you from other WIOA partners and stakeholders or our state or local workforce innovation boards. So thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking the time out of your workday. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to our presenter, Mary Lee. And Mary, if you want to start sharing your screen.
Hello, everyone. Please let us know in the chat if you're having any difficulty seeing my slides or hearing me. My name is Mary Gubby Lee. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a licensed social worker. I've worked in mental health and substance use disorders for close to 40 years now. So why are we here today? It's very interesting. One of my organizations that I work with and I do a lot of training for in nonviolent crisis intervention approached me last year and said, gee, Mary, could you help us out? Things are different. with this pandemic. People are acting so differently. We really don't understand what's going on. People seem to be more short-tempered. They seem to be more crabby. They certainly don't have much patience. And this is our customers in our stores. These are our clientele that we're working with. These are even our coworkers and our supervisors. So we really want to hear about nonviolent crisis intervention, but we want to understand, where is all this coming from? So I did a lot of research for them, and I put together this presentation, and I've been doing it pretty much at the request of other places as well, because people are seeing this is not just something that happens up here in Northern Illinois. So let's go ahead and get started. I think what you all probably will agree with me is these pandemics are downright irritating. If you think of what we've been going through for the last year and a half, and even a little bit more now, what was it like to be locked down? Nobody liked to be homeschooled. Nobody could travel or have any fun. We couldn't eat in restaurants for a long time. And the prices have gone sky high, from everything from gas to food. We have to social distance, and we need to do that, right, to stay safe. We also have to wear masks, any kind of protective equipment. We miss our family and friends because we can't travel, we can't get together in big groups. And a lot of people have had huge losses. Unemployment, they've lost their job, they might have even lost a loved one. And many of our holidays were just ruined. And of course, simple things that we take for granted every day, like not being able to hug someone or even shake their hands, that really has had an impact on us. And I'm sure there's other things that you probably could think of that aren't on my list here, of things that were downright irritating and just made me crabby. So one of the simple things is, what? We can't hug people anymore? What about this social distancing? Well, what good are hugs? And when we don't get hugged, what does that mean? Well, believe it or not, hugs actually turn on oxytocin. And that oxytocin actually reduces our stress. So the less hugs we get, the more stressful we're going to be. Plus, of course, hugs, if you just look at it socially, it really helps build our trust. But it also increases another chemical, serotonin, which we're going to talk about a little bit, which helps us have a better mood and makes us feel happy. Hugs help us really increase the whole immune system so we don't get as sick. Plus, it makes us feel better, right? It boosts our self-esteem because it makes us feel like that we're wanted and needed and accepted. But hugging actually releases our tension, because it releases the muscles. And it's one of the first things we learn, even as a young child, how to give and receive, how to hug people and how to hug them back. Plus, it really helps us show that we understand people. So imagine just not cutting back on the hugs, what that has done to us, just mentally, but also chemically. And what about those masks? They are absolutely necessary. And please don't think I am being negative about them one bit, because masks, we know, are the second most important thing to do in this pandemic, second only to getting a vaccine. Well, what does the mask mean? Well, you can't see people smile, and people aren't smiling as much either. And again, we take smiles for granted. Smiles help reassure others. They're just polite, but they're a major way of communicating. Plus, it's a social connection with other people. And if just a nice, gentle smile shows it, we're compassionate. We see you, we hear you, we care about you. Smiles also, however, do release chemicals as well to fight off stress. And the endorphins that they release help really act as a pain reliever, and also release serotonin, which again is an antidepressant. So by us not smiling, we are actually cutting back on these things. And you do know that smiling takes a lot less muscle tension and tissue than it does to frown. So pandemics are really stressful. And boy, this one doesn't seem to have a big ending real soon. So it's stressful for everybody because we're worried about that disease. We really don't understand it. And we don't understand how it works and how it can get bigger and worse all the time. And it causes really, really strong emotions, fear and lack of understanding. But also, if you add what we have to do to stay safe, things like social distancing and wearing masks, it really makes people feel socially isolated. But again, they're necessary, but it does have its impact on people. So we're worried about our own health, but we're also worried about the health of others. Even people who have been vaccinated now know that they can actually get sick again, right? But it also changes our sleep and our eating patterns. We're either eating all the time or not eating, sleeping all the time or not sleeping. If we had already a serious health problem, it's making it worse. But if you had a mental health problem, it's making that worse too. So what are people doing? They're turning to alcohol and other drugs and tobacco, okay, to actually manage their symptoms, manage their stress. That's their coping mechanism. So we are seeing here, and these are from the Centers for Disease Control, a serious increase in things like anxiety, depression, trauma, and people who are seriously considering suicide. Very, very sad and very, very scary. Now, when we talk about mental illness, we're talking about serious illnesses like depression, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. These really affect people's moods and feelings and how they act and how they react to other people. But if you add on extra stress and extra anxiety and extra fear, it's definitely going to make the symptoms of all those illnesses very much worse. So what we're going to talk about today, and this is a little bit of chemistry, so bear with me. I hope that you find it of interest, because I find the brain myself very, very fascinating. And so let's take a look at what we call PET scans here. So we know the pandemic can cause neurological changes in the brain, and it has in many, many people. So if you look down at the left, what does a healthy brain look like? Well, you'll see all this big red stuff fired up, and we're going to talk about that. That's right here, your prefrontal cortex. And it's under your forehead, which is one of the stronger bones in your body. And it also is, it's very well protected because it needs to be. That's what we call your executive functions, how you plan and organize and stay on task and get things done. Well, look at somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder. Wow, everything is all over the place, and it's not concentrated the most where you really, really need it. Then if you look at the two PET scans on the left, depression, okay, and now no depression. Well, notice the no depression is all fired up. Things are pretty well evened out all over the brain, but depression, it's literally you turn the lights off, right? There's no firing up of those chemicals that we need. And the brain, like I said, is fascinating. I don't think we really understand a lot about it. We don't really know a lot about it, and we certainly don't use enough of it. So the brain is composed of billions and billions of nerve cells called neurons. And these neurons, there's, like I said, billions of them. They have these tiny little finger-like appendages that really don't touch each other, but we have to get information from one nerve cell to another. Now, how are we going to do that? It has to cross over those spaces, which we call synapses, by using chemistry. And those are called neurotransmitters. So I have some pictures here. If you look at a nerve cell, it really looks like these finger-like appendages are touching each other. But if you get in really close, you see, no, there is that space in between. And how are we going to fire up that information from one nerve cell to another? Chemistry. And there's a couple of them that are really important. So these neurotransmitters, we have scads of them, okay? And one of the ones, of course, that I have to tackle with in my life, especially this time of year, is histamine, right? So it's getting to be allergy season for me. So I need to take an antihistamine because I have too much histamine. So there's lots of neurotransmitters that do lots of things to our body, but the big three, the big ones that we need to pay the most attention to about today is serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These big three are the ones that are the culprits when it comes to people that have mental illness and substance use disorders. So what do we need that dopamine for? Very important, because it helps us pay attention. It helps give us the drive and motivation to get things done. It makes us feel a sense of pleasure and reward, and certainly regulates our mood. Norepinephrine helps us to stay alert and concentrate. It gives us our energy, but it also helps regulate anxiety and mood. And then last but not least of the big three is serotonin. That regulates things like our obsessions, compulsions, anxiety, our memory, and again, our mood. So you've heard that mood now repeated 3 different times. So these are the big three of regulating all of those things that we really need to function. Now, how we react, again, depends on these neurotransmitters and how they're acting up in certain areas of the brain, because the regions of the brain determine different things that we do mentally and physically. So it's not just what happens, it's also where it happens in the brain. So again, just as a little refresher, that prefrontal cortex, that's one of the key parts of the brain. Not that everything isn't important, but this really gives us our personality. Again, helps us think, plan, organize, pay attention. And of interest to you should be that that part of the brain is actually the last thing in your entire body to mature. It does not mature until at least 25 or 26 years of age. It's interesting that we can vote at 18, we can drink at 21, but our brain really isn't truly functioning to the 100% until we're 25 or 26 years of age. And of course, what is the number one thing that really modulates this entire part of the brain? It's dopamine. So the pandemics again, by having to do physical isolation and the social distancing, it's naturally going to cause big decreases in dopamine. And also what happens when you have that dopamine, you feel more subordinate, like, gee, I don't have any control over my life. There is nothing I can do about this. I can't plan anything because you never know how things are going to turn out. So what, who cares? So that's kind of what's happening a lot, just to the average person, not even somebody who has a mental illness, substance use disorder, or a physical illness. Now, how do we get this information? Well, there was some serious research going on, not far from me, because I'm talking to you from Rockford, Illinois. So about an hour, hour and a half from here, north is Madison, Wisconsin. So at the Madison University of Wisconsin in Madison, they decided, let's do a little bit of research about people emotionally and spiritually, not just physically. And so they decided to choose the Rhesus monkeys. And the reason they did was the Rhesus monkeys are the most similar to our DNA than any other animal or any other being except for chimpanzees. Now, they are very, very close to us when it comes to our blood and our different blood groups, and they're very comparable to our DNA. And they even preceded us going into space. So it was decided, let's take a look at these Rhesus monkeys, because the Rhesus monkeys were very much like humans. They needed to be in groups, social groups, not just familiar groups, but social groups. They enjoyed communicating with each other. They enjoyed taking care of each other and preening each other. And they really worked better and functioned more as a group. So the research was, gee, if we take the group away and we dissolve the group, how will that change these monkeys? And something very, very sad happened, because what they did was they took all the monkeys and divided them up individually and put them in cages individually without being able to see or talk to or even smell anybody else in their group. Here's a nice picture of those Rhesus monkeys going into space. So what happened with this research is the monkeys that were isolated, they tested very, very low for dopamine because they weren't around other beings like them. They were very, very stressed out. They were very subordinate. And if they were offered food or water, they would choose cocaine. The control group, the group that was left in groups, continued to have high dopamine levels, took care of each other, didn't have any stress. And if they were offered food or water, they did not prefer the cocaine. So this again tells us a lot about what happens with the social distancing and social isolation. So we are finding out that pandemics are causing in humans, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, and substance use disorder. And of course, if you already had one of these disorders, it's making it so much worse. So basis to post-traumatic stress disorder. And as you know, PTSD is the result of experiencing a traumatic event. Now, two of us might experience the same event and one be traumatized and one not be, because of course we bring our own substance, we bring our own history to the table, so to speak. But for those who do have a post-traumatic stress disorder, we do know that the chemicals that are increased highly our cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. And we need all three of these things. That helps us stay safe and really helps us with our fight or flight syndrome. But when we have too much of it, it's really seriously threatening. So let's talk a little bit about more of this PTSD. The brain, again, like I said, is very, very fascinating. And one of the things that we've already talked about is this prefrontal cortex here, that front part of the brain, right behind our forehead. But another thing that's very, very important for us to managing our decision making and our feelings and our feeling of safety, especially, is this little teeny tiny one called the amygdala. And again, it's not protected by those heavy bones like our forehead, but it's protected because it's very, very much in the center of the brain. The whole brain is kind of wrapped around it, so to speak. But that helps us make some very, very important decisions. So let's see how some decision making is different when you have post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, just to show you, we need all that dopamine. That's all the red stuff. We need most of it in our prefrontal cortex up front. And if you have PTSD, it's all over the place. So now this helps you understand just by looking at this picture that people with post-traumatic stress disorder are always hyper, right? They're always intense. They're always on the lookout. They're very, very vigilant because that dopamine is everywhere. So let's take a look about how this dopamine and how this amygdala work here with our prefrontal cortex. Well, let's take into consideration just an event. Let's pretend it's back to the 4th of July and we're hearing fireworks, okay? So we hear the fireworks, that crash, boom, bam. Wow, that's a threat. And it might even sound like a gun. So that threat is going to go to that amygdala, center of our brain. Now, the amygdala is going to have to decide, should I fight or flight? What should I do? I need to be safe. I'm the one who's going to tell the brainstem what to do with fight or flight, but I better check this out with the prefrontal cortex first and find out, is this what I need to do? So that amygdala sends those neurotransmitters up to that prefrontal cortex and decides what that should happen as a consequence. Well, in this particular case, the person does not have post-traumatic stress disorder. So the prefrontal cortex is going to say, hey, amygdala, calm down, relax, no problem. It's the 4th of July. It's just fireworks. So now the amygdala knows everything is cool. We're going to back off. We don't need to start with that fight or flight sort of syndrome. We're okay. Now, think about somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder. The same thing happens, and they hear that horrible threat going on. Well, that threat, again, is going to trigger that amygdala to think about, what are we going to do? The crash, boom, and bam. Is somebody out to get us? Could that possibly be guns or other weapons? The amygdala is going to have to make a decision to tell our brainstem what to do that says, no, I better check this out with my prefrontal cortex first. I've got to have some good decision making going on. But in this particular case, remember that prefrontal cortex doesn't have all those neurotransmitters that it needs. So it's going to make a really bad decision and it's going to react, and it's going to have the amygdala go to work with that stem and say, we got to get out of here. This is dangerous. We can't cope. Now, remember I said with post-traumatic stress disorder, there's other chemicals, not just that dopamine, that are really impacted. One is cortisol. And cortisol, again, we need it, right? It gives us the energy for that fight or flight and helps us make decisions. But also too much cortisol causes some serious physical problems in our brain. It increases our blood sugar, our glucose. And as a result, people gain weight, they develop acne, they have heart attacks, and even strokes. So cortisol, when we need it, is fine, but constant cortisol is very, very bad for us. Same thing with adrenaline. That gives us the energy to get going, right? And that comes out of an adrenal gland. So it should only be released on the condition of stress, because it does help us get our blood going and everything, but also it makes us literally gasp for breath and get ready for that fight or flight. Now, we know that trauma rates are very, very high, right? We do know that, we do understand that. And because of that, we have to think of how does that impact us? Well, first of all, the most important thing to understand is hurt people hurt people. So people that have been traumatized are the ones who are going to react and hurt people. And again, their brain is misfiring, their brain is misfunctioning. But since the rates of trauma are so high, I think we should assume that every person has some trauma in their background. That should be an assumption we make daily, whether it's the people we work with, the people we play with, right? We should assume everyone's been traumatized. And that means we really need to constantly use what I call trauma-informed approaches. So what does that mean, really? What are some of the approaches? Well, first of all, people need to feel safe. They have to feel that they're safe with you, that it's a safe environment. They also have to learn trustworthiness and transparency, and they have to have that. Because of course, if you've been traumatized, especially if it's from somebody that you love or care about or respect, you're going to lose that ability to trust other people, and you're going to really need the transparency. Peer support, being with people who are like you, who have also experienced trauma. People need collaboration. They also need to feel like they have some power, they have some control, because if they've been traumatized, they've really lost that sense of power and lost that sense of control and don't feel like they even are able to make a choice. And trauma-informed approaches also should take everything into consideration, from the person's race to their culture, to their own history, and any gender issues they have. Now, PTSD is just one of those serious illnesses that is caused by the pandemic. And of course, if you had it before the pandemic, it's probably been challenged and more than likely made worse. But another serious problem that we know that is caused by the pandemic are anxiety disorders. And anxiety disorders are the most treatable of all the mental illnesses, but there are so many anxiety disorders. So there's a generalized anxiety disorder, something, just an overall feeling of gloom and doom, something awful has gone wrong with the world. And then there are things like panic attacks. And you might have seen somebody have a panic attack. I mean, it looks like and it feels like a heart attack. Their mind is racing, their heart is pounding, and it's very, very serious, because sometimes people can give themselves a heart attack by having a panic attack. And then there are phobias. Phobias are irrational fears. And for us, for humans, and really for all beings, we tend to stay away from things that make us afraid. But these are irrational fears. So a common one that we see is social phobia, just being afraid of other people and feeling like you can't even leave your home and be safe. So let's take a look at what a brain looks like without panic disorder and another one that does. So if you look at the one on the left-hand side, and I personally don't like the word normal, but it is a scientific term for the normal or the control, a person who does not have panic or anxiety disorder, everything's just kind of flushed around, kind of evenly, right? Everything is just where it should be. And then look at the one on the right-hand side. Notice what's missing. You don't see any red. And what is that red? That's the dopamine. Again, it's going to help regulate our mood, but it's going to help us really make some good decisions and be of the best judgment. So again, people with anxiety disorders before the pandemic probably were made worse, okay? Adding on all the anxiety that the pandemic causes. But the pandemic has also caused people that didn't have anxiety disorder to have an anxiety disorder. The next of the big illnesses that's been seriously affected by the pandemic is depression. Now, we all feel sad or down at some point in our life, but we're talking here what we call a clinical depression. That is one that goes on for months. And even if we're sad from the loss of a loved one or a loss of a job, most of us can spring back from that. Most of us can use our resilience to at least heal from that. But people that have a serious depression, a clinical depression, this would take, months and years to do better, from maybe medication and definitely therapy. Now, depression has both emotional symptoms and physical symptoms. So emotional, like how you feel, being sad, feeling guilty, not having an interest in anything, and sadly, thoughts of suicide or death. But again, it also has physical symptoms. People eat all the time or don't eat at all. People sleep all the time or don't sleep at all. They have no energy. They have no get up and go. They don't even have any interest in sex. So look at these scans for somebody who has depression versus somebody who does not. So again, the no depression on the left-hand side, see how things are a little bit more evenly, and you can kind of see that red and oranges a little bit more evenly distributed. But then if you look at the brain of somebody who has depression on the right-hand side, there's not much of that red or orange at all, and it certainly isn't very easily distributed. So again, if you had depression before the pandemic, it might have put you even in a deeper depression. But if you didn't have depression, it could have caused you to be depressed. Now, last but not least, what I want to touch on is substance use disorders. Because again, we know if you had it before the pandemic, it could have been made very much worse. But we also know that people have turned to alcohol and other drugs to manage all the stress and anxiety of this pandemic. And we tend to blame people for their substance use disorder, which really is very sad because this truly is an illness. It is certainly not a choice. It is very much like other illnesses we have, like diabetes, like high blood pressure, like asthma, like obesity. So it's very much an illness. It's something that happened to the person did not cause. And because it's a chronic illness, not one treatment episode is going to resolve the problem. Just like not one treatment episode is going to solve the problem of somebody who has diabetes. So it really needs a combination of treatment and activities, and we should pretty much expect relapse because it is something that's going to ebb and flow. So substance use disorder, again, serious illness, and how was it affected by the pandemic? Well, a couple of interesting facts here is we do know during the entire calendar year of 2020, alcohol sales around the country rose 262%. So obviously the people who were drinking more, and a lot more people started drinking. And keep in mind, when we think about statistics like this, that we know that on average, only about 20% of people with this disorder are even getting any treatment. There's not enough treatment. There's not the availability of treatment. People aren't always willing to go into treatment. And then there's a lot of stigma that causes people to not get the treatment. So we definitely know the alcohol is on the rise. The other thing that we do know is the overdose deaths from people that are using heroin, especially heroin and fentanyl. Those really rose in the calendar year 2020. They reached 93,000 people, which is a huge number, even across the entire country. Now, I'm here in Rockford, Illinois, which is part of Winnebago County, part of your Northern Illinois group here. In the year 2020, we had 166 overdose deaths, and that rate was up 28% from the year of 2019. Very sad. So back to these pandemics, right? Why are we here today? Well, they put people more into crisis. It's just not causing or making the mental illness and substance use disorders worse. It's putting people into an actual crisis for many reasons. And when people are in crises, they are very much less patient, right? People are doing strange things. I mean, you've noticed even on the airlines now, they're not serving alcohol anymore, and people are getting into fights with the flight attendants. People are acting out all over. Overall crime is skyrocketing. It's definitely high where I'm living right now, but it's really climbing throughout the entire country. So when I'm talking about crisis, I'm not just talking about, gee, my pen ran out of ink. I'm talking about really serious crises. So again, we have the ones that were economic, like people losing their jobs, people having to pay more money just for groceries or gasoline. But we're talking other crises as well. It could be losing a loved one, losing a job, and just losing the connection with other people. But it's causing people to go into a crisis as well. And again, less patience, can't wait in line, even though you have to, and you have to be 6 feet apart. And people don't feel like they have any control over things, and they lose control over themselves. They're acting out verbally and physically. Again, that shortness of patience. And because of these things, we're seeing a really big increase in de-escalation. If this is ever a time that we need to do it, both in our workplaces, but overall in the country, even with law enforcement, this is the time we need more de-escalation. Now, what causes these crises? Well, it could be something internal, right, that we have that we're carrying around, or it could be something external, something that happened to us that causes people to physically and verbally act out, right? Go into that crisis. And we have to understand that the people that we're dealing with, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. And sadly, it's possible for us to do something, not understanding this all, and putting somebody into a crisis. So what are some of the precipitating factors of crisis? Let's talk about these in general, but let's also talk about these with what's going on right now with that pandemic. People feel like they don't have any power over or control over everything. As soon as we get something planned, we've got to change it. Okay, so an example is I had actually 7 trips planned in the last year and a half, and they were all canceled. So it's minor things like that, but it's also major things like I really don't have any control over where I can eat or how I can shop or where I can go. Lack of sleep. And again, the pandemic is causing people to sleep all the time or not sleep at all. But with this increased anxiety, people are not sleeping, and they're not sleeping well. And we need that sleep time to rest our brain. And we need that sleep time to really calm our whole body down and get that oxygen around to our brain and all the places that we need it. So there are certainly more problems at home now with the pandemic, right? When people are forced to work from home and go to school from home and congregate at home, and you could be with your home pod, but you really shouldn't be out amongst a lot of strangers or any big groups. And so things are quite different. People who are involved with the court system, of course, are in a precipitating way in crisis here. It's not fun to go to court. We're seeing much more people get arrested and go to jail. And if you have any kind of issue from going to court itself or being on probation, it certainly is going to be a precipitating factor to put you into crisis. We've already talked about the chemical abuse, right? Anything, alcohol and other drugs. And we know that it's really kind of off the charts right now with this pandemic. Hormones, okay? So people who are going through different stages of life, okay? Whether it's adolescents going through puberty or women going through menopause, hormonal changes are a big risk. But as I also mentioned now, this pandemic is causing hormonal changes in people as well. Pregnancy can be a crisis in and of itself. And I know people who are pregnant, are planning to get pregnant, are more anxious, right? They're concerned. Is it safe for me? Is it safe for the baby? Should I even be pregnant? Should I even be getting the vaccine if I'm pregnant? So again, it's putting people into a lot more crisis stage. Anniversaries. Anniversaries could be a crisis. And again, it could be a happy anniversary, like an anniversary of someone's marriage. But think it could also be a sad anniversary, the anniversary of someone's death. And there's always that displaced anger. We might be really angry with something that happened to us, something that bad's going on at home, but we take it out on somebody else. Maybe because we couldn't hold it in anymore, but also sometimes we take our anger out on people because they're safe. We know they can take it, they can handle it. And with this pandemic causing anger, we're seeing so much displaced anger going on. Of course, there could be triggers. Okay, again, if you've been traumatized and there's some kind of trigger going on, it could certainly cause us to go into crisis. And there could be a physical cause. Again, people who are not feeling well, especially those who are in pain or have anxiety about their illnesses, they're definitely going to be a precipitating factor for going into a crisis mode. And we've talked a lot about trauma. And that's one thing I think that's really important, is to think about, because the trauma rates are so high, we should really assume that everyone's been traumatized and try to go back to use that trauma-informed approach. Okay, so how can understanding these precipitating factors help you? Let's get into the de-escalation part of the presentation now. The first thing I think we have to try to do is to prevent people from even acting out in the first place. Let's not get them so upset and so riled up that they are going to be verbally or physically abusive. So we need to be proactive, right? And I'll be talking with you about how that can be. But we also need to make sure that by recognizing when people are at risk, that we aren't causing that active out behavior. We don't want to be the one to trip somebody off, so to speak. We certainly don't want to do that. So we don't want to be a precipitating factor ourselves. So let's talk more about those. So how do we know when people are getting close to really losing their temper and might even become violent? So think of this little laundry list here of things. A person that's clenching their fists, or maybe they're scratching their jaw back and forth. That jaw is a very, very strong, it is the strongest muscle. Or maybe there's a sudden change. This is what we're talking about, for you to be observant and try to prevent them from the first place. All of a sudden, they've changed how their body language, or even changed their tone of voice. Maybe they're getting louder. Maybe they're getting faster. They could start pacing or fidgeting. Again, people don't just go on and off like a switch. They change their eye contact. People that don't usually look you in the eye are now staring you right down. Or people don't want to look you in the eye because they're ready to go off. Think of that rooster stance where you stick out your chest and you move your arms and body away. That also is a big sign of conflict escalation. And then, of course, just being disruptive in your behavior, starting to yell, starting to bully other people, refusing to comply with the rules. I mean, we've seen people literally losing their temper when they're asked to put a mask on, all right? So just defying or refusing to comply with the rules. These are all signs you better be on the lookout here. So what do you need to do to help de-escalate? First, you need to look at yourself, because if you're in a bad way and you're not doing very well yourself, it's only going to escalate the situation. So if you're afraid, or if you're also losing your temper, the easiest way to calm down and relax is to breathe. Breathing is so important, because by using simple breathing techniques, we can not only calm ourselves down, we actually lower our blood pressure and our stress level. And when I say breathe, I'm talking slowly, that in through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. And if you have to do that 2 or 3 or even 4 times, do that before you open your mouth. So calm down first. Then, again, before you open your mouth, look at the situation. Make sure that everything around you is safe. Make sure that there's a way to escape. See how many other people there are around. You don't want other people to get hurt, but you also don't want other people to jump in and join in on this crisis. So the best thing to do with working with somebody who's in crisis is to be alone. Excuse the other people. And if they won't leave, you can leave with the person who's in crisis. Look at how you're talking. Use a very dull tone of voice, and don't get defensive, even if it's directed at you, because people will try to push your buttons and try to make it personal. They might call your names, they may make fun of you, anything they can to control you, to make you lose your temper, because see, then they're justified in losing theirs. And that dull tone of voice is something you have to really, really work on. And that's probably one of the toughest things that I have to remember when I deal with people in crisis. Because when it comes to talking, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. We call that paraverbal communication. So your tone of voice, make sure it's smooth and supportive, that people can tell you are not judgmental. Volume. And volume is a tough one for me. I come from a pretty noisy family. We have to remind even the adults to have inside voices, but also by being a trainer and doing things like this, it's normal for me to project my voice. So one of the things you have to do is to really quiet down. And the quieter you are, the quieter the other person will be. And then look at the cadence and rhythm. Unfortunately, I'm a pretty fast talker, so hopefully not too fast for everybody here, but this is something too that I need to work at. So I have to be slow, calm, and quiet. And just by doing that, it's also going to decrease my crisis level, but it's really going to decrease the level of crisis in the other person. Look at other situation, like I said. Look who else is in the room, and if you can, try to get them out. We'll also look around at other things in the room. Things like chairs or tables or items on a table, they could become a weapon. Make sure there's exits, and make sure that the other person doesn't feel like they're trapped in a corner too, because that will really cause people to go into crisis. So make sure that they don't feel trapped and that you're the person trapping them. If you don't feel calm, because you might be nervous and who knows, your heart might be racing a little bit, try to be a good actor or actress. Okay, so look that way, even if you don't feel that way. Keep the eye contact. Even if they stop the eye contact with you, maintain the eye contact with them. If they're sitting down, you sit down with them. If they're standing up, you stand up with them. But again, if you can, encourage them to sit down, because people get less violent when they are sitting down. But again, if they stand up, you just stand up too. Try to keep a neutral facial expression. Some people call it the poker face, but try to keep it just neutral. Make sure that people can always see your hands. Have your hands out. Never put them behind your back, and try to keep them even above your waist if you can, and have them open and very, very relaxed. You certainly don't want to cross your arms, right? You certainly don't want to raise your fist. You certainly don't want to touch with your finger here or threaten with your finger. So keep your hands open, okay? And in an open and relaxed position. This is going to make the person feel a little more relaxed as well. Now, CPI, which is an international training organization that trains people in nonviolent crisis intervention, has devised the term supportive stance. But this is not new. This is also taught in the police academies, right? So law enforcement officers, if you see them arrive on a scene, they're going to have a supportive stance. That means, look at the woman on the left, okay, one foot in front, the other one turned to the side in an L-shaped stance, L-shaped. And you notice her hands are wide open and they're easily seen by the person. So even though the person is angry and shaking his finger at her, she's in that L-shaped stance. And that's going to help for very, very many reasons. Look at your body language. Don't shrug your shoulders like, oh, there's nothing I can do. All right. And again, we've already said, please don't ever point your finger at the person. And no pacing for you or fidgeting, no shifting from one foot to the other. That L-shaped stance. All right. One foot in front of the other foot in the shape of an L. And also be sure you give them good space. Space between you two is very important for them as well as for you. We call that personal space. And the reason we call it personal space, it's not just space for us, it's also space for our stuff. So when I go out somewhere, if I'm sitting down, I make sure my purse is within view. That's part of my personal space, right? And I'm sorry that I've been robbed a couple of times. So I like to keep that right in my eyes view. So personal space. So if people need things around them, let them have that. That's their personal space. So we're talking an average of 1.5 to 3 feet. Well, 1.5 is if we know the person really, really well and we're close to them. The average for other people is minimum of 3 feet. And of course, because of the pandemic now, we're asking that people maintain a distance of 6 feet. But a minimum of 3 feet gives people the personal space that they need. To make sure that you're all still awake here and watching this presentation. But this is what we're talking about. We really have to give people the space that they need. Now, how much space they need is going to depend on a lot of different things. First of all, gender. You might feel closer or safer with someone of the same sex, for example. A relationship, if they're family or friends, of course, the personal space is going to be shorter. The size of the group, but also the size of the person. So if you're a shorter person, you might feel very, very intimidated by a taller person. State of mind, and that's going to be their state of mind as well as your own. And look at culture. Many cultures would say you don't have eye contact. You certainly could not come within 3 feet of the person. So try to be culturally sensitive. Noise. Noise sets off other people and can put people into a crisis. History, okay? History is your own history. So if you've had a history of an assault, for example, or you've had a history of physical or even verbal abuse, you might need to stay further away from the person. But think of the hurt person's history themselves. Where have they come from and what's happened to them? And again, the overall environment, how you act in your own home is going to be totally different than how you act in the parking lot at Target. And that whole aura, how are things feeling now? What's going on? Personal space will certainly vary with person's appearance. If people are not dressed appropriately, if they even smell or have a body odor, that's certainly going to dictate how much personal space we need. But then there's the title or the role of the person. You know, how you might be closer to a coworker than you are with the CEO of the company. And now we have to add personal space with social distancing just to stay healthy. A big part of de-escalation is empathy. Empathy really has to be shown during any kind of conflict situation. You don't have to agree with the person. You just have to show them that you understand how they feel and you understand what they're thinking. Because if you could just let them know, I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is, or what you need is, what you need me to do is, it lets them know that they're important, that you are interested in them, that you do care about them. And of course, the hardest piece about all this is to be non-judgmental. As soon as you become angry, you're already judgmental, that they're wrong and you're right, right? So empathy is the most important thing, okay? Next to, of course, our body and our voice, but we have to let the person know, I hear what you're saying. And you could guess. Maybe you say, so I think you need is, and if they say, no, it's this, then at least you get out the right thing, right? You come to an understanding. So if you're not quite sure, guess, they'll tell you. And part of that empathy comes from what we call active listening. And that's something we just talked about. Paraphrasing, okay, and open-ended questions. We don't have to just say, so how are you doing? Okay, but ask, so what's going on? Tell me more about it. Those kinds of things will really help people tell you what's happening. And again, the softer you say it, okay, and the definitely not talking loudly, but also not talking quickly will help. Ask them if it's okay to take notes. Believe it or not, most people will think that's good, that you're writing down what they're saying. You're going to do something about this. This is important. and ask for their ideas. This isn't going so well right now. What can we do to help? Let me write this down. And like I said, the big thing is talk about the anger rather than act on it. Having somebody yelling or losing their voice is a lot easier to deal with, and it's a lot easier to calm down and slow down than it is if they're hitting you or they're hitting other people. Now, last but not least, remember, the de-escalation is not working, okay? You've already changed your body stance. You've changed your tone of voice. You changed your volume of voice. You changed your personal space. You've done all the empathy you could. You've been a really good active listener. You've tried all of this. And if it's not working, then you have to stop. Because if the situation isn't safe, you have to call for help because your safety comes first. Now, this is a lot of information that we've done. And thank you so much for your patience and listening and holding your questions till the end. But I would be happy now to take questions if that's okay. Kirsten offered to help me with that because we would like to give you folks, answers to any questions that you might have. So please take a minute if you haven't put some in the Q&A right now and add those in.
Great, thank you so much, Mary. And yes, like Mary just said, if you have a question or if you just even have a comment, you can put that in the chat. But any questions, if you could direct those to the Q&A and we'll answer those. And then while we're giving everyone a minute, I just wanted to reiterate that this session was recorded and the recording will be up on our website within 48 hours. I can put that website in the chat here momentarily. And you can also, one second, trying to copy and paste, put this in the chat for you and talk at the same time. The slide deck is also already in the chat. Here's the website where you can access that slide deck as well as the recording within 48 hours. And all of that information will also be in your follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow. So you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow asking you and prompting you to take our follow-up survey. So if you could just take 5 minutes out of your day. I'm also going to go ahead and put that follow-up survey in the chat for you all if you would like to take it while it's fresh, while the session's fresh in your mind. I will put that in the chat for you. And then that follow-up email will have the same website where the recording and slide deck can be accessed as well. So here's the follow-up survey. And I don't see any questions coming through, Mary.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, at least for people, how they felt, if they've learned anything from this, of course, and that probably is part of the survey, but also if this kind of made sense with what they're experiencing on the workplace with people being so impacted by this pandemic.
We had a comment. She said this was outstanding.
Looks like we have one question.
Yeah, it was just a comment.
Oh,
They
okay.
typed it in the Q&A, but she said this was outstanding.
Thank
Yep.
you. It does help us understand people. I mean, it's not going to help us cure the whole problem of the pandemic, right? But at least now we can understand where people are coming from and why they're acting the way they do. But it's also hopefully going to help us stay safe.
Yes, absolutely. Can we use this information 24/7?
That's an excellent question. Thank you so much for that. So what I assume you mean by 24/7, is it just for the workplace? Absolutely not. I use this at home all the time. I have family members that are just downright crabby because, oh, another trip was canceled, or no, we can't have that for Christmas dinner, or, we can't blow the candles out on a cake anymore. I mean, so it's definitely things you have to use everywhere you go, whether it's at the grocery store, at your workplace, or even with your own family and friends. And of course, that active listening is definitely going to be helpful wherever you are, and the empathy.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. Sherry, did you have any final remarks or advice?
Well, I hope to come back and see you folks again. I'm going to be working with the staff here to come up with some other trainings that might be good with having like another mental health or substance use disorder twist, or even getting into more in depth with the whole topic of trauma, because that is something that's just, it's a crisis all over the world, but it's particularly a crisis here in the United States right now.
Great. Well, we had, Sherry said this was the best session to date. That's a high compliment.
Wow.
So thank you so much for that feedback, Sherry. Again, everyone, I put the feedback survey in the chat. If you have the availability and the time today to go ahead and take it readily, or it will be in your follow-up email tomorrow. And we just want to thank everyone for joining us this morning, taking the time out of your workday to learn a little bit about non-crisis intervention. And Mary, any final closing remarks?
No, I just hope you all stay safe out there.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone. Have a great, yep, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.